overheating sucks, so I'm making every effort I can now to try and keep this thing from overheating. So obviously, this fan and radiator are not original to this car. Here's the part number for this radiator. Just got it through eBay, obviously aftermarket. And this fan I got through the wrecking yard. Here's the part number for it. It's from Volvos of some kind. So we'll do a soft start, which we'll look at in a second. But so if I drag this up to about 30%, you can see PWM idle percent jumped up. So fan is now running at about 30%. Pulling a decent bit of air even at that. And then see, it soft starts, so it's not just gonna hammer the electrical system real hard. So I think 90 is the actual limit. And I mean, it is pushing some air. And so, obviously, I do not have the L28 in here. It's got a small block Chevy in it. And there's nowhere near as much room as I was really expecting there to be up here. I mean, I thought I was gonna have room for days. But I still have about a finger's width between that bolt and the motor on the fan. So I feel good about that. I don't see any issues with that. Now, if you have the L28 and you're wondering if it's gonna fit, measuring from the front edge of the tank, so you probably add a 1/4 inch if you're going to the inside of the core support. And looking down this way, I would say, the way I'm measuring it right now, probably 7.5 inches. You could probably just round it up to 8 if you want to make sure that you're good. But that, in my case, is about the thickness I have here. So this whole video is going to be going through how I got all this set up. All right, some numbskull in this car's past decided to try jacking it up by this core support member here. And the old radiator has more of a U-shaped tanks, which apparently cleared that. The squared off aluminum tanks will not. So we got to see how bad this is bent now and figure out how much of a hassle it's going to be to straighten it out to fit the new radiator in. Well, my surprise is too low to measure, but the reason the old radiator is sitting in here for mock-up is because the new one does not fit right. The new one is hitting everything down here on both sides because of how much wider the tanks are. So, gotta figure that out. One thing though, a lot of things designed on this car were designed really well and actually to make it easier to deal with. Such an example of that the new radiator does not have. The old one has these little tabs here, and they even have a little notch on the end of it, so the radiator can't slip out of the core support. Wow, that is an awful noise. The nice thing, though, is that lets you just set the radiator here, and it automatically lines the bolt holes up, and you're already good to go. That is some quality engineering. Made some progress on getting the fan shroud and everything in here. And the way I'm mounting it here, if you'll notice, if you've ever seen one of these Volvos, there's supposed to be a module right there that runs that fan. It's not there because I had to take this whole thing and flip it upside down. This is actually the bottom. Because if I had it right side up, then that module right there was getting into the water pump pulley bolts. And I'm really shocked that I have such little space at the front of this thing. I really thought space was not going to be an issue at all in this thing, you know, given that I went from an inline 6 to a V8. But I think I lost all my space back here when I had to pull the motor as far forward as possible in order to get the shifter coming out in the right spot. Regardless, though, it seems like it's going to work out just fine. So I flipped the whole shroud over. I went along the edges, cut off everything that I'm not going to need because it had all kinds of stuff mounted to it and relays and whatnot. Thankfully, I left enough length in my harness here that instead of it having to come up like this, how I was originally planning, it goes down here just the same and it'll plug in and everything's good. Now, I have lost the wire, the signal wire from the megasquirt that goes to that module to tell the fan how hard to run. I've lost that wire. It's I think it's up under the dash somewhere. I got to figure out which one it is and fish it all the way out here because it's definitely not here. So as far as mounting this shroud, I'm using some of the original mounting holes from the Radiator. And so this is a M6 by 1, 40 millimeter bolt is what I ended up using. And then I used a little washer for an M6 bolt and a 3/4 inch 3/8 spacer on the inside here, just so that way it doesn't crush the plastic down. So I've kind of got it mocked up here. I've got to go through and, you know, try and make all this look a little bit nicer and then shoot some paint on it. But it'll have a bolt on either side that holds the top of the shroud in. And I feel like that'll be plenty strong enough. I just gave it a big washer and some epoxy under it just so it has some more strength. And then underneath the car here, you can see that module. Underneath the car, the Radiator has these 2 tabs that were welded to it. And this aluminum, you got to be really careful with. You cannot tighten down on these very much at all without tweaking these brackets. So that's something to be mindful of. But I made these 16 gauge steel brackets. It's just a little elbow piece that's adhered to the bottom of the shroud. And then I drilled a hole through the metal first before I put the epoxy on it. And then ran the drill bit back through both the epoxy and the plastic and put a rivet through it. I just felt better having that instead of just the epoxy. And the way I did this to make it easier on myself, it's kind of hard to tell right now. But if you'll notice, this part is really narrow and this part up here is not. The fan shroud's actually sitting on a lip. There's a lip that I cut into this bracket piece so that when you drop the fan shroud in, it bottoms out against the aluminum and then you can just, the bolt hole's already lined up and you're good to go. So I did that just to make getting the shroud reinstalled in this thing a lot easier. And you can see it's got a nut in there. That's what this guy's threading into, so that's all good. And I did not drill a through hole, so the bolt bottoms out against the steel. There's no way you can put a bolt, if you put a longer bolt in, it'll bottom out against the steel. It's not going to run through the tank of the Radiator because that kind of worried me. So that's how the bottom of this whole circus is mounted. And I was having all kinds of space issues over here. You can see I had to put some washers in between this, whatever this bracket is that goes to that rod, that goes to the control arm. I had to space this guy down because the tank of the Radiator on both sides was hitting this piece right about here. And I never would have been able to get a lower radiator hose on this thing, which also would have been a major problem. So the fitment of this Radiator is not great, if I'm honest. But if it'll keep the car cool, then we'll call that a fair compromise. One thing I'm trying here, just as a quality of life thing, we'll see how it works out. But this little spacer here that keeps the bolt from crushing down on the shroud too hard, I put a little JB weld on the threads of the bolt that spacer covers up. So the theory is that, well, one, that's going to keep the spacer from falling off of there every single time I take the shroud off. But also, it's going to keep the bolt from falling out too. So we'll see how that ends up working out, but I think that'll make life a little bit easier in the future. In an effort to help this thing be as efficient as possible, I went ahead and tried to seal it up, except for these corners, just because I can't be bothered. I should have epoxied something in there and trimmed it to fit. But I had this sticky foam stuff from whenever I did all the HVAC stuff in the car. I ran a strip of that down either side of the radiator, so that'll seal the sides up. And then I didn't want to do that on the top because I think it looks pretty ugly. So the top, this is just a piece of vacuum line that I JB welded to the shroud. So all the JB weld is on the inside and it's holding that vacuum line on there. And I think that looks a lot better than trying to use the foam. And this piece here, because I don't have near as much room as I was really expecting to. This piece here comes off because I trimmed out this whole section of the shroud so I can pull the shroud pretty much straight up. Otherwise, it is almost impossible to get it in there around the water neck. So I can take these 2 screws out. They're just coarse thread screws into the plastic, just a little piece of metal that I trimmed up and painted. Take that off. Whole thing comes straight out, and I mean, it really couldn't be any easier. So future me ought to appreciate that. I went ahead and threw the alternator and the power steering pump on there with the bracket. And with the studs that I have screwed into the block, I don't even have to take the shroud off in order to take that on and off, which is great. But I think as far as the radiator and the fan shroud goes, I think it's pretty much done. I mean, it bolts up to the core support good. I got that done. I got all 4 fasteners in, the 2 at the top and the 2 at the bottom for the shroud. Everything's good there. Everything looks good with this guy. I think a hose will clear there plenty fine. Same deal with the lower one. So I think the next deal as far as the cooling system goes is going to be the oil cooler, because I would like to find a way to use this. So we'll get into that later. But I'd like to get an oil cooler on here, and at the same time as doing that, I'm also going to have to figure out all the radiator hoses. So I think that's going to be the next deal, and we'll call the radiator and the fan done. My wiring's all good. Just got to plug it in and zip tie it away somewhere. But other than that, I am really pleased with this.